5.
Surely the only thing that's stopping the protests being banned is because the authorities haven't got the bottle.
4.
In theory, the party of workers, although we all know they're not at the moment.
3.
So our policy-making credibility is in tatters.
2.
The reaction of Western leaders to these kind of atrocities, Islamist atrocities, is to do anything except name the evil that's behind it.
1. We have liftoff.
Welcome once again to Planet Normal, the Telegraph podcast with Alison Pearson.
Hello.
And me, Liam Halligan. It's just a week until Christmas, co-pilot, but the high street tills are still subdued and the news is anything but festive. The Bondi Beach massacre saw 2 gunmen open fire on a crowd of roughly 1,000 people attending the Hanukkah by the Sea event in Sydney, Australia. After more than 100 rounds were fired from a pedestrian bridge using rifles and shotguns, 15 victims were killed and another 40 injured. The perpetrators, Indian-born Sajid Akram, aged 50, and his 24-year-old Australian-born son Naveed, have been charged with acts of terrorism. Authorities say the pair were motivated by Islamic State ideology and extremist anti-Semitism, and 2 IS flags and improvised explosive devices were found in their vehicle. You've written extremely powerfully about this ghastly incident in Wednesday's Telegraph, Alison. Link in the show notes. I've meanwhile focused on the economy, with the UK seeing another rise in unemployment this week, and the Bank of England set to make its latest decision on interest rates at midday on Thursday, the day Planet Normal's released. My Sunday column, link in the show notes, was about the European Union's decision to all but abandon its incoming law banning the sale of new petrol and diesel cars. A move that leaves Labour and Energy Secretary Ed Miliband totally isolated, something we discuss with today's Planet Normal guest. So how are your Christmas preparations going, Alison? There's always so much to do before the big day. Have you got your tree, ordered your turkey, done your shopping, written any cards? And on top of all that, I know you're really soldiering on today, because like a lot of us across Britain, you've caught a nasty dose of flu.
I have, co-pilot. I was feeling incredibly smug in my new Superwoman gym incarnation and seeing all the people falling like 9 pins around me. I was thinking, yay, I haven't caught anything. And then, of course, the damn lurgy snuck up on me.
You're a snuffleupagus.
Snuffleupagus.
Can I do my Vicks Sinex nasal spray?
Yeah,
Retro advert recounting from the 1970s. Oh, Mum, I can't do my exams today. Of course you can, Malcolm. Oh, Liam, I can't record Planet Normal today. Of course you can, Alison.
Nasal tech has come on a long way. You know, I've been taking something from Boots, squirt up each nostril. Yeah, anyway, so I've had to cancel a few things.
Other high street dispensers are available.
Other high street dispensers are available. We're not having a proper Christmas this year because we are going to Australia to see my sister, brother-in-law, various nieces, and my mum, who's out there at the moment.
Oh,
so the usual desperate running around, buying turkeys and things. We're going to have a modest repast and then climb into the Emirates premium economy, which will pretty much clean out the Pearson savings account.
And then you're going to get to Australia, open your presents, and then throw another shrimp on the barbie.
Throw another shrimp on the barbie, exactly. Yeah. So yes, I've got a little something for you, but
Aww.
my kids are of an age now. Basically, all they want is money.
Money's fine with me too. If you.
Actually, someone gave me a 50 quid the other day. It's a remarkably pleasing thing, a 50.
I haven't seen one of them for ages.
No, I know. Just you wait. You never know. You're lucky.
You might even buy a round in the King's Arms this Christmas before you go.
Steady on. But
look, we're staying upbeat, but you and I chatted last night, and your column in Wednesday's Telegraph really is a powerful piece of writing. And I know events in Australia, ironically, where you're headed with your lovely family, have really, really, really gotten to you.
Listeners will know I've been pretty active in the cause against anti-Semitism, since the 7th of October massacres 2 years ago. And it has been pretty obvious, Liam, that these marches and the the rise in displays of sort of ugly chanting on our streets. So we're always going to end up somewhere bad. They've been sort of crucibles of hatred, I think, these marches. I should say, I know listeners will know I'm a big free speech person, and I would hesitate strongly to advise any march be cancelled. But I really think now, to borrow Jane Austen, whose 250th anniversary is this week, they have delighted us long enough. I really think now it's become something absolutely horrible. And I know Jews in Australia, where they've had particularly virulent anti-Semitism, synagogue set on fire, calls outside the Sydney Opera House to gas the Jews. And lots of Australian Jews were saying, you know, something really bad is going to happen. And indeed it did. So absolutely horrifying scenes of the two terrorists you described, Liam, just taking shots casually at lovely families, children, elderly people on the beach. Particularly poignant. I mean, they were all terrible cases, but Alex Klateman, an 87-year-old Holocaust survivor, is among those murdered. And imagine that Alex survived the Holocaust in Europe, made his way to Australia, and then the very end of his life being murdered by the same kind of insane, savage, barbaric hatred that nearly got him when he was a child. And one thing I wrote about in the column, Liam, is the reaction of Western leaders to these kind of atrocities, Islamist atrocities, is to do anything except name the evil that's behind it. So we'll always have, more gun control, says Anthony Albanese, the Australian Prime Minister, typically cowardly and craven reaction. Oh, let's give the Jews more money for security at their synagogues, says Sir Keir Starmer. I mean, this is an astonishing reaction, Liam, isn't it? It's basically, we're not going to really drill down and examine the hatred that's driving these monstrous attacks. And it's not just a hatred of Jews. I believe it's a hatred of the West and civilization. It's literally, let's give the Jews some money to make it a bit harder to murder them. And that's where we're gone. Just want to read this quickly before you tell me what you think. One of the Jews murdered on Bondi Beach was a guy in his 60s called Reuven Morrison, R-U-V-E-N. And you might like to Google him, listeners, and you'll see a gentleman of my sort of age picking up a brick and trying to throw bricks at these barbarous individuals. And he was unfortunately shot dead, but he did protect a woman with a baby in a pram. And Reuven Morrison's daughter, heartbroken daughter, Shayna, she attacked Australia's Labour government in an open letter. And she said that the nation's weak leaders had dismissed Jewish warnings as noise. Australia did not fall quietly, said Shayna. It failed loudly, repeatedly, and with full knowledge. Its government watched hatred grow and chose to do nothing. They minimised it. They excused it. The government's lack of response led to a black, monstrous tornado cloud of anti-Semitic hate to roll in. And she pointed to the repeated protests across Sydney and Australia and around the world. It marched on bridges. It waved green, black and red flags. It called for the death of the Jews. This attack was not a shock, said Shayna. It wasn't sudden, it wasn't unpredictable. Anti-Semitism was out in the open. The threats were real. Fear was voiced again and again. And the government did nothing that mattered. Collectively, they abandoned us all. They cannot claim innocence after repeated warnings. The government that lets hate fester holds responsible for the blood follows. The Australian government has blood on its hands. The blood of all the victims. My father was murdered because Western leaders were weak, because they were lazy, because they cared more about optics than lives. This was the result of neglect and moral rot at the top. Australia betrayed him. Its government betrayed him. They cleared the way. My father is dead because those in power chose inaction, and the stain will not wash off. You are guilty.
It's an extremely dignified, measured under the circumstances, and therefore even more powerful letter from that young woman. What must she be feeling? I was moved to tears reading your piece, Alison, at the thought of happy elderly people dying under the Australian sun rather than during a Polish winter decades and decades ago. They must have thought how fortunate they'd been in their life until the last tragic moment. I think the shockwaves of this are going to be considerable, not least in the UK. I think there's now going to be a very, very, very severe amount of pressure coming on the government and, above all, I think, London Mayor Sadiq Khan to end these frankly outrageous, almost weekly protests that gum up the heart of central London. I've got Jewish friends who I grew up with in northwest London, who still live in the area, whose families moved here after the war for obvious reasons, who delight in being Londoners. Some of my earliest childhood friends who proudly bringing their children into central London to go to music concerts, to go to theatre, to take advantage of the wonderful cultural assets of this city, cultural assets to reflect all kinds of races and ethnicities that have lived here over the years, and yet they will not come into central London. They're scared. They are literally unable to enter the centre of their own city, of their own birth. And I think what can possibly stop now the ending of these protests, these really aggressive protests where people shout and scream things that go way beyond tweets that have got people sent to prison, and they even have had people turning up at their doors on Remembrance Sunday morning, Alison, with huge respect to you. I think the only thing that would stop the authorities trying to ban these really outrageous protests now, I give no quarter when it comes to free speech, and I know you don't either, but these pose a serious public danger, these protests, because you could have some serious reprisals happening here. Surely the only thing that's stopping the protests being banned is because the authorities, what's the phrase, haven't got the bottle. They haven't got the guts to ban them because they think the unrest from the ban, the protesters will turn up anyway and protest even less unpeacefully.
Well, we have today, this is Wednesday, we're recording, the Met Police Commissioner, the Chief Constable of Greater Manchester, have just announced that those chanting "globalise the Intifada," which is what we saw in all the bodies piled on Bondi Beach, will now be arrested. I think that this is shutting the stable door after the large herd of horses have galloped out. But the police are implying, Liam, that the Crown Prosecution Service are saying there isn't enough there to allow them to arrest these people. I would raise an eyebrow at that. I think if we were seeing far-right protests in Muslim areas, A, they would never be allowed, and B, we'd have police in riot gear down there pretty sharpish. Now, I agree with you about the marches and the fact they have to be banned, but I think there's a much worse problem underpinning this all, isn't there? And this is that Western leaders have allowed, both through legal and illegal immigration, have unleashed a huge problem in our peaceful, liberal, democratic societies, because obviously we now have in the UK, we have about 250,000 Jews and we have over 4 million Muslims. So one provides a much bigger voting bloc than the other. And I think it's pretty clear that the British Jews have been thrown under the bus. Many now are very, very sadly making the decision to make Aliyah and go to Israel. They see no future, no peaceful future in the country that their parents and grandparents chose for them to make their futures, because, as the late Rabbi Jonathan Sacks said, it was the kind country. Britain was the country of fairness and decency and the rule of law. And the fact that Jews are leaving, Liam, that's a real canary in the coal mine moment, because it's not going to stop with Hanukkah. They're going to come for Christmas. I've got absolutely no doubt about that now. So a vast problem with Islamists. It's a few years ago now that MI5 said they had more than 40,000 jihadists on their terror watch list. That's an awful lot of people who hate us and our way of life. And I think the police, as we're seeing, my senior police source, I've spoken about him many times on Planet Normal, he's basically saying that this multiculturalism model, diversity is good, Islam is a religion of peace, that's drilled into police officers. They're very, very reluctant to adjust their thinking on it. So where we've ended up is with the police now deciding that the best way to keep the peace is by appeasing the loudest voices. A lot of influence is being exerted on the police by so-called community leaders, and that's affecting policies and operational decisions. And my source points to the way that West Midlands police, you'll remember this, Liam, recently banned Maccabi Tel Aviv fans from attending the Aston Villa match, blaming the threat of violence from Israelis and from Jews. But I'm told it was purely because they didn't want the Muslims in Birmingham kicking off, because they were scared about the scale of the disorder. And I'll just finish with the words of my senior police source. The police have afforded Muslims favoured status, whether that's about avoiding trouble or trying to look woke. So basically, the Jews are on their own. Now, that's in our country. Just want to say before we come to you, Liam, that several people did speak out very boldly this week. And we had Kemi Badenoch, Tory leader, addressing Conservative Friends of Israel Hanukkah reception. And she said, like me, she was tired of standing on platforms sharing condolences to good people. Solidarity is not what is going to get us out of the problem. We know the evil that we face. We know how it operates, how it abuses our democracy, subverts our institutions. Let us be plain. It is radical Islamism that is a threat to Western civilization and the rest of the world. And so say all of us, Liam, that we have to really crack down on it now, because I think when it comes to the hatred, I think our country is probably drinking in the last chance saloon.
There's a lot there, Alison, and I think this issue is going to absolutely dominate politics in 2026. This isn't the last episode of Planet Normal. We've got our Christmas special, haven't we, next week?
We have.
And we promised to be more festive and joyful during that. But, we like to have a laugh and we like to, bring some levity to...
Don't say I'm not ready. Wait for this.
You got them ready?
I've got the reindeer.
Put the antlers down, because that's for next week.
He's eating a lot of carrots. He's just,
We like to bring some levity to the news, as we have been in the last 30 seconds. But, we are first and foremost working journalists, and we have to reflect the news. And the news is pretty grim at the moment, not least the topic that we've been discussing so far at the top of Planet Normal. By the time a lot of people listen to Planet Normal on Thursday, the 18th of December, it may be that the Bank of England has already cut interest rates again. They last cut in August to 4%, all the way down from 5.25% back in August 2024. And at the time of recording, it's almost nailed on, according to financial markets, that we're going to see another cut to 3.75, another 0.25%. I actually think this is a mistake for reasons that I've outlined in many previous newspaper columns on my When the Facts Change Substack. I think that, yes, unemployment's rising. It's gone from 4.2 to 5.1% since Labour took office last August. Yes, growth is slowing. Growth has been negative in 4 of the last 7 months under Labour, and in 9 of the last 16 months under Labour. But that's not any reason, just because the government's own pro-growth policies aren't working and are in fact counterproductive, because they're ideological tax rises and huge regulation and, back to the 70s, powers for trade unions in the Employment Rights Bill and so on. Just because those policies aren't working and are ideologically misconceived, it doesn't mean that the Bank of England should be trying to engender growth. That's not what the Bank of England is there to do. The Bank of England is there to clamp down on inflation. And even though inflation's come down on Wednesday to 3.2%, it remains significantly above the Bank of England's 2% target. And there are many inflationary whiz-bangs on the horizon. And for these reasons, I don't think the Bank of England should have cut rates. That won't make me popular, but I'd rather be unpopular than wrong. There were endless so-called city economists you see on the TV news all the time, because they're easy to interview. But city economists doesn't mean what most economists think. City economists are basically people who are working for companies that are punting stocks and shares. And they want the Bank of England to lower interest rates because that will juice up the stock market and they'll sell more stocks and shares. A lot of very credible economists, including Professor Jajit Chadha of Cambridge, who we've had on the podcast before, including a former Treasury economist, Julian Jessup, who's very well regarded, former Monetary Policy Committee member, Andrew Sentence, and myself. There are 4 quite noted economists there. We're still waiting for your verdict, Alison. We have all said we don't think the Bank of England should be cutting interest rates because inflation is still toppy. It's still a lot higher than comparable countries, certainly across Western Europe, and because there is in no sense a conclusion that the UK has got on top of inflation in this inflationary cycle. And anyway, Alison, the idea that cutting the Bank of England interest rate boosts the economy is so out of date. Back in the day when, most young people lived in houses that they bought with a mortgage, and most mortgages were variable rates. Yes, if you lower the base rate at the Bank of England, it will put more money in consumers' pockets because their mortgage payments will go down. Less than 30% of households are now living in homes being bought with a mortgage, right? Because so few youngsters now are able to go through that rite of passage. And of those mortgages that we have, over 3/4 are fixed rate. So they're not impacted either. This is purely driven by politicians and I would say, firms punting stocks and shares who want to juice up the stock market. And this is not what we need. The UK's policymaking credibility on international markets is absolutely at the lowest it's been in my adult lifetime, I would say. We've just had the completely outrageous spectacle of Reeves's second budget, totally chaotic in its run-up, in its execution, and in its aftermath. A proper disgrace. All the briefing and counter-briefing. I might raise tax, I might not raise tax, depending on what some 22-year-old advisors just told the Financial Times. Absolutely insane. And at the same time, this comes off the back of the Bank of England getting it so wrong on inflation during 20 and 2021, with Governor Andrew Bailey constantly saying, inflation, it's transitory, old boy, don't worry about it, chiding commentators like me who actually spotted inflation and were on the money. So much so the Bank of England had to launch its own review into itself, chaired by Ben Bernanke, the former chairman of the US Federal Reserve. So our policy-making credibility is in tatters. And when inflation is still high, for all the very, very loud commentators from the city saying, yes, we need rate cuts, because I got to get my Christmas bonus. Literally, that's what's going on here. That's what's going on. What we are doing is damaging the idea that Britain is run by grown-ups. And we desperately need to convey that idea because our borrowing costs are sky high. Our debt service bill is sky high. And I'm afraid, again, there won't be many people who will say this out loud because people who generally really understand financial stuff are busy making money for themselves from it rather than saying the truths that need to be said. But there are a number of really credible economists now. Most of them won't go over the parapet. Most of them won't say it because they want to be on the MPC or whatever. Or they want to be seen as, decent, credible people rather than outliers. But the outliers are so often right before times of crisis. And there is a sense that crisis is looming. And if the Bank of England, having lowered interest rates, if the bond markets start pushing gilt yields up again in the opposite direction, it's going to expose even more the absolute gulf between what the Bank of England thinks is going to happen with inflation and what the financial markets think is going to happen with inflation, in particular the big institutions that lend so much money, 10 to 20 billion quid a year to the British government. That's quite a convoluted, complex explanation, but these are quite complex ideas, Alison. But the bottom line is that the Bank of England, I believe, if it has indeed cut interest rates on Thursday, and all the signs are that it will, I think it's bowing to political pressure from Downing Street in desperate need of some good news. And it is seriously damaging the UK's long-term policy-making credibility, which in the long run means there's more chance of a big crisis and certainly means that inflation and interest rates, actual interest rates in the real world, not the ones that the Bank of England just decrees, but actual demand and supply interest rates on financial markets will be higher for longer. And I say all that with enormous regret. Policy making is difficult. Monetary policy making, interest rate setting is extremely difficult. There are one or two people on the MPC who I've come to admire. I've given the MPC a hard time over recent months and years for having not enough cognitive diversity. It's all been about ethnic and gender diversity rather than getting seriously credible people who think different things from a rigorous point of view so you can have a proper discussion. That's nothing to do with gender or ethnicity. There are all kinds of gender and ethnicity diverse people I know who could do that role. But we seem to have picked far too many yes men and yes women on the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee. But there are now one or two, I must say. I think Catherine Mann is one. I think Megan Green is another, who have been prepared to stand up for long-term policy-making reality, But all the signs are, Alison, as we record this, that they're about to be outvoted and interest rates are about to go down, at least the Bank of England's policy rate.
We're lucky to have you on Planet North for many reasons, but what you've just outlined to me is something that most commentators wouldn't pick up on, is that fact that most, many young people now are not on the housing ladder. And if they are, they're with a fixed rate mortgage. So the old levers don't work. A few things I picked up on this week, Liam, absolutely astonishing, referring to young people. There's now talk of a lost generation. There's rising youth inactivity in the UK. 946,000 young people are not working or learning. Now, that's the size of our third biggest city, just to give you that. 580,000 young people are not seeking work, and 28% of young people are inactive due to poor health or disability. This is very, very serious, and something I wanted to get your input on. So looking at the annual average regular earnings growth, who knew? Who knew?
What have you become, Alison Pearson? What have you become? You got an English degree from Cambridge. You should be working for the bloody Arts Council or something.
Well, I can read out the words, even if I don't know what they mean. Annual average regular earnings growth, 7.6% increase,
for public sector,
right?
yeah.
Public sector. Let's have a look at all the old hobbledy-hoy horses like us, bloody hobbling along in the private sector, 3.9%. And this from the Office of National Statistics, again, look at Pearson go, there was 6.18 million employees in the public sector in September 2025 this year. And that's up 62,000 since September 2024. A very large cash prize for any Planet Normal listener who can tell us what any of those people are actually doing. And Liam, okay, final Velma stat of 2025. Okay, here we go.
That was probably the final Scooby of 2025.
That's probably the final Scooby. At the height of the British Empire,
here we go.
Fewer than 500,000 British civil servants ran 25% of the entire planet without computers, internet, or phones. And today, as we've just heard, we have over 6 million government employees trying to run one tiny island, and adding to that total 5,000 new civil service hires per month with these hugely inflated or very nicely, comfortably rising salaries, while the poor bloody foot soldiers who are rolling the boulder Sisyphus-like up the hill are feeling poorer and poorer. Can't go on, co-pilot, can it?
Alison, I'm not only impressed with all the stats you're quoting at me, I'm also impressed with your multiple literary references. They are legion. They are legion. Look, this is what Labour do, right? They increase the size of the state in order to generate more client voters, be they state employees or people on welfare. They bribe people with other people's money to vote for them and keep them in power. That's exactly what's going on. It always goes wrong. They always run out of other people's money. And that's what's going to happen in this case. And finally, on youth unemployment, yes, I spotted that. And I've been writing about youth unemployment in recent weeks. Youth unemployment in this country is now 16%. It's up at sort of French and Italian levels, which is unusual for the UK. And why is it so high? It's high largely for policy reasons under this government. Again, I'm afraid. When Rachel Reeves increased employer NIC contributions, she announced it in October 2024, it came in April 2025, in order to keep the headline increase as low as she could while grabbing huge amounts more revenue, or hoping to, she lowered the threshold at which national insurance payments start from just under 10 grand to 5 grand, which disproportionately penalises lower paid workers, so part-time workers. It used to be that you could employ somebody for 20 hours a week, a young person, without paying any NIC as an employer. Now you only get 8 hours a week before you start paying NIC. Why do you think it is that there are so few young people getting jobs? Why do you think it is that so many graduates aren't able to get on the first rung of the employment ladder. It's partly because of AI, that's happening, but it's mainly because of policy decisions by Rachel Reeves. Not just the NIC rise, but also the minimum wage. The government implemented a 17% increase in the minimum wage in one go in April. And there's another massive increase in the minimum wage for young people. This is young people's minimum wages coming in April 2026. Is it any wonder that employers don't want to take on young people? And yet that massive increase, that headline increase in the minimum wage for 18 to 20-year-olds, which I just outlined there, almost 17% in one go, that was a direct bid by the Labour Party to try and buy the youth vote by imposing on businesses higher wage requirements. It was completely wrong, it's counterproductive, and it's a major reason why now those same young people, far from being better paid, haven't got a job at all. Our guest on the rocket this week is Claire Coutinho. She's Shadow Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero and Shadow Minister for Equalities. Since entering Parliament as the Tory MP for East Surrey in 2019, Coutinho, a maths whiz and former investment banker born in the UK to Indian parents, has enjoyed a steep rise, serving initially as Rishi Sunak's Parliamentary Private Secretary, before ministerial roles in Education and Disabilities, and then Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero. At that time, she was the youngest member of the cabinet at just 38 years old. Under Kemi Badenoch's leadership, Coutinho's retained that shadow energy role and was at the heart of the Tories' volte-face on net zero earlier this year, when Badenoch declared 2050 net zero targets as impossible. I started by asking Claire Coutinho about the economic damage of the UK's sky-high energy prices, the most expensive in the Western world, and the negative impact of those prices on economic growth.
Well, this is the thing. There is no country which is high growth and low energy. And I think what people have woken up to, including in my party, is that the path that we are on is locking us into higher energy prices, not just for a couple of years, but for decades. And you can see the results of that in the fact that we're losing industry. People's energy bills are now still extremely high, going up, even though gas prices have fallen and Ed Miliband promised them £300 off. And so everybody is looking at this space now and going, well, what on earth is going on? We were promised if we built all these wind farms and we put all these solar farms in, we would get cheap energy. And it's just not true. And I think that's why it's gone so high up the political agenda, as you said, because we can see we need to fix this problem. And actually, there is a big battle now between the left and the right about what to do going forward.
It's not just household bills, is it, though? For many Planet Normal listeners, that will be what's front and centre. There'll be a lot of people having family Christmases, and whoever's the house owner where families gather, they'll have an eye on the old thermostat on the wall, won't they? I know there's always a battle in Alison Pearson's house over the thermostat between her and himself indoors. We often talk about it on Planet Normal, but it's not just domestic bills. It's those company bills, it's business bills, it's the fact that manufacturers are energy intensive. It's the fact that if you run a pub, your energy bills are sky high, or a shop. It's not just domestic bills, is it? It's a lot more than that.
Exactly. And I think that highlights what everyone can see, that net zero is now quite perverse, because every time you see one of these factories closing down, and we've lost in the last few months chemical plants, plastic plants, even a wind turbine factory, we're losing all of these jobs because our energy prices are too high. And all that is happening is those businesses are going abroad, sometimes to countries like China, which are 60% powered by coal. And we're importing back the goods. So we're importing back goods with higher emissions and fewer jobs in Britain, all in the name of climate change. It just doesn't make sense. And I think everybody can now see that.
And of course, we're famously drilling a lot less in the North Sea for oil and gas while we're importing energy, not least liquefied natural gas from America, chugging 3,000 miles across the ocean in diesel-powered ships. It's madness, isn't it?
Well, I think this is my litmus test of, are you a sensible person when it comes to, energy and climate policy, or are you a complete loon? Because anybody who thinks it makes sense to shut down the North Sea and import more LNG, which has 4 times the emissions, in the name of climate change, is completely mad. And anyone who thinks it's better for our energy security to be importing billions of pounds worth of gas from Norway from the very same fields we could be drilling ourselves is, again, a complete lunatic. So my general first question I ask people in meetings is what they think about the North Sea. And if they don't think that we should be drilling in the North Sea, then I think you can dismiss them as someone who is a complete lack of sanity in this area.
Now, a lot of people listening to that, Claire, will be punching the air saying, finally politicians get it. But, are you really calling former Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, a complete loon? Theresa May? I know the Tory party's under new leadership. I know you're rolling out new policies now. Kemi Badenoch in particular gave a very punchy speech earlier this year, I think a game-changing speech in which she said net zero 2050 was impossible. Yet it was your party that introduced these really, really stringent taxes on North Sea drilling. It was your Prime Minister who, of course, introduced the Climate Change Act, Theresa May. Tell us about what's going on in the Conservative Party, where former leaders are now being portrayed as complete loons. How's that happened?
Firstly, the legislation that Theresa brought through was before my time in Parliament.
Sure.
But I think my view of what happened is I do think it is ultimately a very conservative thing to want to protect the environment. The beauty of the countryside, the beauty of the natural world, wanting to preserve something and hand it down to the next generation is a fundamentally conservative principle. And I think what happened at the time is people conflated net zero with protecting nature. And actually, there was this view that if you cared about nature, if you cared about the environment, then you had to support net zero. And that's what won so many people in the party over to it. But the problem is net zero is not nature, and net zero is actually an incredibly bureaucratic, state-led system of looking across your economy and forcing carbon reduction, no matter what consumers want, and overriding the concerns of the economy. And that is fundamentally unconservative. So that's where I think we lost our way. I think it was a mistake.
I think that's a very interesting and thoughtful answer, Claire, if I may say so. So let me respond with what I hope you feel is a thoughtful observation too. Yes, I agree with you that for a lot of Conservatives, net zero became preserving the country and so on. But also for a lot of Conservatives, net zero became a way of shutting up their 14-year-old daughters. Net zero became a way of the party not being what Theresa May called the nasty party. Net zero became a way for your most senior cabinet ministers to be fanboys to Greta Thunberg. There was a lot of delusion, not just misguided stewardship of the countryside, wasn't there? There was a lot of political vote chasing and showbiz going on.
Well, ultimately, I think there is a mix of probably the two. I'm sure for some people it was that virtue signalling and, doesn't it feel good that we're backing this area? But I do think for a lot of people, that deep principle of wanting to protect the environment was as a major driver, and worrying about what you're handing down to the next generation. But I will just come back to the North Sea, because actually we were the only party who were saying we must protect the North Sea and we care about the North Sea, and the North Sea is ultimately a good thing for the country. And I remember that because when I came in to be Energy Secretary, I started legislating to protect licenses in the North Sea. And I remember those debates in Parliament and was finding it astonishing that you wouldn't get, the SNP in Scotland had said that they wanted to ban licenses in the North Sea.
Even though their case for independence depends on North Sea oil drilling. I mean,
it's unbelievable. And every single other party would sit there and bash us for saying, hang on a second, if we are going to need oil and gas, we should use our own.
It's very interesting, isn't it? You've now got the likes of the GMB, the third biggest trade union, lots of other trade unionists who are tearing their hair out at net zero. How's that going politically for you guys in Parliament? Are you finding that you're making alliances on these issues of net zero as a destroyer of industrial activity? Are you making alliances with some on the Labour benches? Are you feeling that since that Kemi Badenoch speech, the political wind on this issue is starting to shift?
What I think is interesting, particularly on the left, is there are various factions all have now, I think, a good reason to question net zero. So if you are blue Labour, for example, you've got people like Maurice Glassman, who made a very good speech saying we are deindustrialising, and that is hurting the very communities that we're meant to be protecting as the Labour Party, in theory, the party of workers, although we all know they're not at the moment. If you are a sort of from the Blairite wing, you've had the Tony Blair Institute, which is criticised Ed Miliband's Clean Power 2030 plan because it's going to raise the price of electricity. And they've said that you should follow a cheap power plan, which funnily enough is exactly what we've proposed, and said we should look at carbon taxes again, which we had already put forward. But their concern is about future growth and AI. So whether you're blue Labour, whether you're Blairite, if you are from that sort of soft left and you care about poverty and welfare, again, what you're doing at the moment is pushing up the cost of energy, which massively affects living standards. We know it's the thing that people care about the most in the country. So across that whole spectrum of Labour, I think there are rising concerns, but their problem is the only person who was still hugely bought in, we must pursue net zero no matter the cost, is their energy and net zero secretary, Ed Miliband.
Who indeed often tops polls of party activists of who they want to be the next prime minister. Crikey. So tell us where your party is on the North Sea at the moment, what your policies are, what the Tory manifesto says about using our own natural resources in order to try and bring down domestic and industrial energy bills.
So we've been very clear, and we had said all along that we should maximise economic recovery in the North Sea. We are very lucky to have those resources. Loads of countries would want to have a resource like the North Sea, and we're the only country in the world at the moment which is shutting down its own domestic energy supplies. So in order to support the North Sea, we would end the ban on new licenses, which Ed Miliband is bringing in. We would scrap the windfall tax. And I recognise we did bring that in when the country was in crisis, but it's been there for far too long. Labour have made it far, far worse as well. And it's taxing the North Sea into oblivion. So you have to end that. And we would be very clear that what we want from the North Sea is to maximise economic recovery, to get as much oil and gas out as possible, because whilst we still need it, we should be making use of our own. But alongside that, you have to look at, for example, having a lot more nuclear and also dealing with the biggest problem that you've got when it comes to energy at the moment, which is that our electricity is the most expensive anywhere in the world. It's some of the cleanest, most expensive electricity in the world. And the thing that I always think is, Milton Friedman had this great quote about a car. You could have the safest car in the world, but if no one could afford it, what's the point? Ed Miliband is putting us on a path of having the cleanest electricity in the world, but nobody is going to be able to afford it. So what is the point? And our argument is you should make electricity cheap. If you make electricity cheap, that's good for the economy. That's good for AI. That's good for the current jobs you've got, your industries, but also your future jobs that you're hoping to get. And it's great for living standards. And that is the fundamental priority of any energy secretary. And that's what they should be doing, is making our electricity much cheaper.
You mentioned that AI in an earlier answer, of course. The artificial intelligence revolution needs an awful lot of grid power. We haven't got the grid capacity to build a lot of these data centers that are apparently going to power our economy going forward. That's one issue. Another big issue is electric vehicles. There's been a big change of mood from the European Union, hasn't there, on electric vehicles? And yet the Labour Party is holding out, keeping this ban on new petrol and diesel cars from 2030. Your party shifted its position on that. What do you think is going to happen, Claire? And just explain what it will do to Britain's car making industry, in your view, if that ban goes ahead in 2030.
So I had an equivalent ban in my department when I was Energy Secretary, which was on boilers. Essentially, it was the mirror image of electric cars and petrol cars, but it was heat pumps versus boilers, which I blocked. Because what it is doing is saying to a car manufacturer, if you don't meet these sales targets set by government, we will fine you. And the problem with that is you're overriding consumer choice. It's short-term a distortion of the market, as opposed to building long-term competitive advantage in industries and making sure your consumers have the products they want. So the reason that the EU has pushed their ban back is they're not selling enough EVs. They think the market's too weak. And
they've gone back to 2040 at the earliest, haven't they now?
Exactly. And if you don't do that, what will happen is your car manufacturers will die because they'll be weighed down by all of these fines. They won't be able to meet the target. So they've got all these additional costs. And they're already facing huge competitive pressure from places like China, and they will just go under. And that's important because obviously we want to have those jobs, we want to have that industry. But there's also a bigger importance in all of this at the moment, which is, we are at a peak moment of geopolitical risk in the likes that we haven't seen for a really long time. And if you dismantle all of your heavy industry and you make yourself reliant on other parts of the world and you end up in a conflict, there's also a national security question mark here as well. So yes, this is about backing consumers and letting them choose the products that work for them. And again, our cheap power plan, which would cut electricity bills by 20%, make the electricity cheap is my view. And if people want to buy an electric vehicle, go for it. If you want to have, electric home heating, fill your boots. Our job as government is to make sure you can have the infrastructure, which means you can choose the products that you want so that you can have a good life. But if we don't get that right, it isn't just consumers that will suffer, it's the whole national security of the country as well.
If you're going to convince Claire Coutinho, the country, that your party has changed, there needs to be some serious truth-telling going on. Do you think the political and media class was naive about net zero? Do you think your party was naive about net zero? Were you naive about net zero?
I think naive is actually quite a kind word because the
stupid,
the
mad, take your pick. Fill your boots, Claire Coutinho.
The truth is we should never have signed up to something without knowing what the price tag was. And I don't think we should have signed up to something which was fundamentally unconservative in how it operates. So the problem with signing up to the net zero target that Theresa May did in 2019 was that we really didn't know how it was going to affect the economy. And like I said, it was before my time in Parliament. And actually, credit to Kemi Badenoch, she was one of two MPs that spoke up and asked me questions at the time. But signing up to something where you've got really no idea what it's going to do is, I don't think, a conservative principle. And the second thing is the way that net zero was structured in this country is different to other countries. It was very rigid. You have these carbon budgets which are set about a decade in advance, which dictate what you should be doing across every single part of your economy. And essentially, that is central planning. And we know as Conservatives that central planning does not work. So I think the whole structure of how we went about net zero did not look into, the principles of what it was doing and how it was going to affect people. Now, that being said, I don't think, you could look at reform, which they talk about sort of net stupid zero and, returning to coal mines and all of these things. I don't think a worldview which is anti all clean tech is sensible either. I actually think there's a lot of interesting things in terms of innovation that's happening in this space, which is a good thing. If we took a conservative view of free markets and backing innovation and letting consumers choose things when they want to, could be great things for the country. And actually, those principles are where we are grounded now, which is why we've said we're not going to do that zero emission vehicle mandate. But we do care, for example, about battery innovation in this country. And what we want to do is build long-term competitive advantages and let consumers choose the best things for them. That is the best way to make sure you can make the most of innovation and also make sure that your consumers are getting the best products.
I think it's an objective observation, Claire Coutinho, that your party leader is breaking through a little bit more in the news, as it were. She's had some punchy outings at Prime Minister's questions and so on. But you don't need to be a professional political observer or a professional politician to know that there's a huge amount of plotting and scheming going on in your party. A lot of people are looking at the May elections when, along with the Labour Party, the Tories are on course to get hammered by Reform and others in various parts of the country. What would you say to those, Claire Coutinho, who are, let's not pretend they're not doing it and they don't exist. What would you say to those in your party who are plotting, who are looking to the next leader, who are looking for a way, probably post-May, to move against Kemi Badenoch?
So I am actually going to push back on this because I think that Kemi, particularly since conference, has really come into her own. There is a sort of a confidence and enjoyment. You know, her takedown of the budget was brilliant. I think it spoke for a lot of people in the country who were deeply frustrated at this mad Labour government and what Rachel Reeves is doing.
We can all agree she's made progress, but she does still have this sword of Damocles over her neck from, you know, some senior people in your own party. What do you say to them?
Well, I actually think a lot of people have looked at what she's done since conference and gone, yes, she's on the right path. And yes, she's making inroads. But also, importantly, she's holding Labour to account on the economy. People love to overwrite the scheming. And I'm not saying there's never been any scheming in my party. I would be foolish to say that. But I actually think there is a lot of party unity at the moment, because what people are very clear about is this Labour government is one of the biggest disasters that we've seen for the country. It's a massive disaster for young people who can't get a job. It's a disaster for farmers who are going to have to sell their farms. It's a disaster for businesses who've got hiring freezes on because they've been absolutely hammered. For your average person in the street whose rent is going to go up, whose energy bill is going to go up, whose food prices are going up because of this Labour government. They need to be held to account, and ultimately they need to go at the next election. So that is a unifying force of the party. That's what we need to focus on.
And just very briefly, Claire, at the end, you are also Shadow Minister for Equalities. You have become involved in this debate on Labour's definition of Islamophobia, the government's determination, in your words, to pass a blasphemy law by the back door. Why would that be damaging?
If you look at what's happened in the country, you have seen a huge amount of resentment because our public sector has not been able to grip difficult issues like counter-terrorism, like grooming gangs, like gender inequality, things which are happening within the Muslim community. Now, what Labour want to do is bring forward a definition for those public bodies which will stifle free speech and make them harder to grip those things in the name of reducing anti-Muslim prejudice. But it will only breed resentment. It will only make the situation worse. And what they don't understand is that if you continue to have these cases in this country of horrible cases of child abuse, horrible cases where Jews are being murdered, for example, by Islamist extremists, that is what breeds prejudice. That is what breeds resentment. We need to be a group of people who are all equal before the law, whether that's for protection or penalty. That is what will bring this country together. And wherever these horrible cases are happening, our public bodies need to be more free than they are now, because we don't often in these cases, they don't act because they're worried about being called racist, to take them on and grip them.
Claire Coutinho, Shadow Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero and Shadow Minister for Equalities. Thanks for appearing on Planet Normal. So there you go, Alison. Claire Coutinho, not only talking a lot of sense, in my view, on net zero, trying to defend her party's record in the past while acknowledging serious errors were made, some quite interesting use of words there by her, but she's also the Equalities Minister, and that's why I questioned her at the end on the government's new definition of anti-Muslim hatred.
Yeah, I find Claire very, very impressive. She's got a strong presence on social media. She reacts, instinctively, it seems to me, and very passionately to a lot of things that I mind about. I think she's saying these things now, Liam, and she seems to say them with conviction. I think some of us who have been pointing out the Olympian folly of net zero might argue that the Conservatives could have done a bit of research into how much it was going to cost before promising to deliver it by 2050. Listeners will know that I'm on the board of the Global Warming Policy Foundation, and one of my fellow directors, Professor Michael Kelly. Michael is Emeritus Professor of Engineering at Cambridge. He introduced semiconductors to the UK, immensely eminent man. And Michael, several years ago, said to me that he had started to cost what it would cost to implement net zero in the UK. And he said, I can't do the New Zealand accent, but he said, I got to 3 trillion and stopped, right?
Yeah.
So there are Conservatives, when Theresa May was blithely laying down this legacy policy, for a legacy for her, not for the country, of course, I do think that a little bit of due diligence might have been called for, Liam, really, because a lot of what Labour's now, and of course, Ed Miliband is far worse, far worse, and is in the grip of a sort of ideological zeal. But I suppose, we should welcome the fact that the Tories have now come to. The one query I would say to you, we've got Claire and obviously Kemi Badenoch, the leader, firmly on board with this now. Lots of members of the Climate Change Committee, which has laid down some of these absurd policies. A Climate Change Committee in which a former Tory transport minister told me most ministers went in fear of the Climate Change Committee. That's still full of a certain kind of conservative. So someone like me would want to know that those kind of conservatives would no longer have a veto in the party. What do you think, Liam?
There are certain kind of conservatives, Alison, who aren't prepared to ruin their social life and their dinner party invitation list by saying the truth. And there are other conservatives who are prepared to do all those things, which undermine their social life, mean, lots of their school friends think they've turned nasty and all the rest of it. We're now in a situation where there is an awful lot of policy making in the UK, which isn't only not helping the lives and livelihoods of ordinary people, but is making those lives and livelihoods a lot worse. And I think the way we've tackled net zero is definitely one of them. Not the long-term move off fossil fuels, which we need to do and which is happening anyway, and which the market will bring about. There are some tremendous technologies about which can make us work in a more energy efficient, cleaner, more environmentally friendly way. I'm all for that. But the way the political class, particularly on the left, but also on the kind of squidgy right, have embraced the way the sort of hero worshipping of the preposterous Greta Thunberg, sorry, but a lot of what she says is preposterous. The hero worshipping by mainstream politicians of her, the idea that if you even question how we get to net zero, then you are a climate change denier. An awful use of a word that is so usually used together with the word Holocaust, the disgusting academic practice of Holocaust denial, which does exist. A climate change denier, that's just an awful use of rhetoric in order to try and suggest somebody who's taken the trouble to really engage with the science and understand the realities of moving to net zero at the pace that we are, the economic realities, the scientific realities, and so on, is on a par with, a murdering Nazi. It's just absolutely disgusting. Yet that is where we've been with this. Yes, we will get to a cleaner world. And yes, that is happening and it should continue happening. But this is happening now at such a pace that Britain's manufacturing heartland is being hollowed out at a huge rate of knots. Our car industry, as I discussed with Claire Coutinho there, is on the verge of complete collapse. It employs over 1 million people, Alison. I mean, imagine the societal fallout of our car industry being completely overwhelmed with a wave, a tsunami of heavily subsidized Chinese-made electric vehicles, which is what will happen unless somebody gets Ed Miliband and locks him away, frankly, not in obviously absolute terms, but in metaphorical terms. Labour simply have to U-turn on this. And yet this is an issue which tears them to pieces because you've got, frankly, ridiculous bien-pensant voters in the university towns and the Swiss London suburbs for whom net zero is the new religion, is a way of them looking down de haut en bas to the great unwashed who drive white vans and try and make a living, on the one hand, and then the trade unions hitting the industrial heartlands, the Red Wall, who can see that these policies are destroying our energy complex, destroying our manufacturing, that the expensive energy that's a direct result of net zero is destroying our economic competitiveness. Now, will Keir Starmer have the guts, in light of this decision by the EU, the shifting of their ban on petrol and diesel cars, to push Ed Miliband around and tell him what to do? I doubt it very much, because far too many Labour activists and economically literate backbench MPs, they don't like Keir Starmer and they want Ed Miliband as their new leader. Now on to our listener emails, the messages you send us at planetnormal@telegraph.co.uk. Please keep them coming, we learn so much from you. the citizens of Planet Normal.
And this is from Charles. And I met Charles when he owned the Orchard Tea Garden, charming outdoor cafe in Grantchester. And Charles is reminding me, Liam, Alison visited on the day we were told our electricity bill was rising from 18,000 to 108,000 a year. Shortly after Charles left the Orchard Tea Garden. I think that's a good example of what Claire Coutinho was talking about, Liam. Dear co-pilot, says Charles, we might have become predominantly an irreligious society, but thankfully our culture is deeply set in Judeo-Christian values. We are therefore familiar with the parable of the Good Samaritan and the question, who is my neighbour? With all our hospices facing a systemic crisis, never has the question of who is my neighbour been so important, for the way a society treats its dying is a measure of its humanity. Letchworth Garden House Hospice has just announced it's entering a 30-day consultation period to make 20 of its staff redundant. This is because this year it faces a £750,000 funding gap, rising to £1.1 million next year. This funding gap, says Charles, is a direct result of Labour's policies, specifically the increase in national insurance, the madness of net zero, which gives us the most expensive power in the Western world, and the massive reduction in charitable giving, which is being experienced right across the charitable sector. This reduction in charitable giving is a direct response to the substantial increases in taxes levied on individuals and companies. For if the government taxes us more, we each have less disposable income to support the charities of our choice. As is obvious, if the government takes from Peter, Peter can no longer pay Paul. In the case of Letchworth Garden Hospice, I'm sure there are many others as well, Charles, the government has confirmed there will be no reduction in their funding this year. They will maintain the current funding levels next year, with a potential uplift in line with national guidance, equating to around £45,000 against the 1.1 million shortfall. I repeat those numbers because they are so shocking. The government will provide a miserly extra £45,000 to fund a 1.1 million shortfall, which its policies have directly caused. It is hard not to conclude that this Labour government has deliberately chosen to deny our citizens a good death in favour of ending the two-child cap element of universal credit and housing a never-ending stream of illegal migrants in hotels and rented homes. After 18 months of this government, says Charles, it's difficult not to conclude that the Labour Party in Parliament have set themselves as the enemies of the people, serving only their Marxist and Islamist client group. It means we, the people, must fight even harder to protect the things we value, such as the hospice movement, against their dangerous, pernicious ideologies. One way, says Charles, might be to send one less Christmas card and send a WhatsApp message instead, donating the money saved to your favourite charity, like the local hospice. They will do more good with this money than this government will ever do. Keep up the sterling work, the pair of you. Best wishes for Christmas and the New Year, Charles.
Lovely email there from Charles. This Alison is from another Alison. Hi Alison and Liam. I felt compelled to write and air my frustrations at our National Health Service. Since being diagnosed with a rare blood disorder, our 29-year-old daughter is awaiting results from an MRI scan and, to hopefully rule out blood cancer, was due to have a bone marrow biopsy this Thursday. When the hospital phoned her this afternoon asking her where she was therefore extremely surprised. On telling them her appointment wasn't for 3 more days, she was told that had been cancelled and a letter sent on Friday informing her of today's appointment, Monday. Even if it were not Christmas, it's extremely unlikely a letter would arrive that quickly. Why on earth could they not have phoned, emailed, or simply sent a text message? Psyching yourself up for a painful and very unpleasant procedure, which is then needlessly delayed, official reason incidentally, that member of staff will no longer be in, end quotes, by heartless and selfish staff, is extremely frustrating, especially when we're all hoping results and a treatment plan will be known before Christmas. The new date for her procedure is the 14th of January, a whole month away, so you can pretty much guarantee it will be February before results are known. Working as a teaching assistant in mainstream education, says Alison, I can only dream about the pay rises already received by those greedy and uncaring medics who are obviously in the wrong jobs. Medicine should be a vocation rather than a cash cow, which holds patients' needs to ransom. Thank you for listening, Alison and Liam. Thank you for my weekly dose of sanity. Thank you for your hard work, humour and humanity. Happy Christmas and a happy and healthy 2026 to you and your guests. From Alison. You can feel the pain in that email, and it, best in the world, let's bang pots and pans on the steps. Yeah, that's not how most people feel. It is not these days how most people feel. And I think the doctors are way off beam. Read the room, guys. Read the room.
Yeah, another strike next few days in the run up to Christmas. Just what people like Alison and her daughter don't need. Alison, we really all prayers being said, fingers crossed that your daughter gets a good result. But too many people are not getting these diagnoses quickly enough to start the appropriate treatment. And we'll be returning to that theme on Planet Normal in the new year.
We certainly will.
Here's a lovely email. Bit of a change of pace, Liam. This is from Woody. Hi, Liam and Alison. I've just come back to Britain after 8 years sailing round the world with my family.
As you do.
Coming home after that long gives you a strange, useful perspective. The country feels far more fractious and anxious than before I left, and much less sure of itself than it ever was. To stay awake on night watches, especially to the Indian Ocean and the Red Sea, I download Planet Normal and listen while the boat and the world ticked by. It was often the only calm, rational voice in some very odd places. Hearing debates between you two about the erosion of free speech back home in the UK, long seen as a liberal bastion, while actually stopping in and witnessing societies where it barely exists at all, and seeing the desperation that follows, was deeply unsettling. Off Sudan, says Woody, we had an attempted boarding by armed men, got tangled in illegal fishing nets in the Arabian Sea, and elsewhere we saw what happens when states stop functioning properly. That experience has a way of sharpening your thinking about borders, order, and what happens when systems fail. I've written a piece, says Woody, arguing you learn more about the English character by looking at boats than statues, from Endeavour and Beagle through to the Channel dinghies now causing such political heat. It's not polemic, but an attempt to explain why the Channel debate cuts so deeply into our ideas of fairness, compassion, and control. I'm a professional sailor and former instructor and skipper, about to be featured in a Telegraph travel piece by travel writer Theresa Machen.
Get you, Woody.
Fantastic. Even more impressive, we are due to appear as the sailing family in an upcoming Amazon US documentary filmed during our circumnavigation. I thought it might be of interest for Planet Normal listeners. Well, fantastic, Woody. That sounds, we'll definitely seek that out. And maybe you can come and be a guest on our rocket. I love that perspective, Liam. I love the idea of Planet Normal being downloaded in the middle of the Arabian Sea.
That's wonderful. And I think in 2026, Alison, in the spirit of Brian the Fisherman, which Planet Normal stalwarts will remember, Brian the Fisherman of Triangle Toast Eaters fame. Yes, I did just say Triangle Toast Eaters in a Scottish accent attempted, because that's what Brian the Fisherman said.
I was, yes.
We need more Planet Normal listeners to become guests. We need to do more of that in the new year, I think. We've had some fantastic Planet Normal listeners who have become guests because they've got a particular expertise or because they've had a particular experience. And sometimes those have been our most loved episodes. So,
certainly have.
Woody, great to hear about your sailing adventures. And we look forward to hearing you on Planet Normal. And finally, Alison, I'm afraid this is a bit of a downbeat one, and we'll end it here. Tim from Cornwall. Dear Liam and Alison, like me, most sane people were appalled at the dreadful shooting in Australia. However, authorities around the world have been warned that this would happen, but few seem to have taken the Jewish community seriously. And so we've had these appalling atrocities here and in Australia. Here, the government's allowed these anti-Semitic marches to go ahead with people hiding their faces behind masks and balaclavas. That should surely not be allowed, says Tim. I'd like to say to these protesters what a great asset the Jews have been to this country in so many ways. The great retail companies they've started, that continue to give great service to this country in the artistic world, the writers, the actors, the musicians, in medicine, and so many other spheres of our lives. I'd also say at the moment we have a government that has no principle or conviction as to how to govern this great country. They seem to be controlled by the left wing of their party and will do anything to stay in office. Thank you every week, Alison and Liam, for the informative and entertaining Planet Normal. Best wishes to you both and keep up your good work. That's from Tim. And on that bombshell, that's it from Planet Normal for another week as we leave our sanctuary of sweet reason, our flying refuge of reason views. Email of the week. It's you, Alison.
Oh, well, everyone's fantastic, aren't they? So we're going to have Woody on the podcast so we can give you a mug when you arrive. Charles, I'm going to come and see you at your hospice to raise money so you can have one then. I'm going to give the 2 mugs this week, one to Alison and to her lovely daughter who is waiting, hopefully, for a really good diagnosis from this rare blood disorder. So Alison and daughter, for your Christmas mug of coffee, please send us an email with mug winner in the subject and your full name and address, and we will send the Rare as Rocking Horse Poo mugs to both of you, richly deserved.
More mug inflation from Alison there. The Planet Normal elves that have to pack these mugs and go to the post office, they'll be going on strike in the new year. We need to treat them well. If you've enjoyed this episode of Planet Normal, please subscribe and leave a review and rating wherever you listen. This isn't our last episode. There will be a Planet Normal Christmas special on the day itself. Alison will be tanked up on Baileys before she goes to Australia. And I'll be there providing wit, reason and levity in equal measure, as I always do. Thanks finally to our producers, Casso, James Hodgson, Louisa Wells. Stay safe and in touch with us, with each other. Until next week, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.